Chapter 7, To Kill a Mockingbird. Jem stayed moody and silent for a week. As Atticus had once advised me to do, I tried to climb into Jem's skin and walk around in it. If I had gone alone to the Radley place at 2 in the morning, my funeral would have been held the next afternoon. So I left Jem alone and tried not to bother him. School started. The second grade was as bad as the first, only worse. They still flashed cards at you and wouldn't let you read or write. Miss Caroline's progress next door could be estimated by the frequency of laughter. However, the usual crew had flunked the first grade again and were helpful in keeping order. The only thing good about the second grade was that this year I had to stay as late as Jem, and we usually walked home together at 3 o'clock. One afternoon when we were crossing the schoolyard towards home, Jem suddenly said, "There's something I didn't tell you."
Scout? You know something else I never told you about that night I went back to the Radley house?
Something else? You never told me anything about that night.
Well, you know the first time when I was getting out of my britches?
Uh-huh.
Well, they was all in a tangle, and I couldn't get them loose. Well, when I went back, though, they were folded across the fence. Sort of like they was expecting me.
They've been sewed up. Not like a lady sewed 'em, like something I'd try to do. All crooked. It's almost like somebody knew you were coming back for 'em. Jem shuddered, like somebody was reading my mind. Like somebody could tell what I was going to do. Can't anybody tell what I'm going to do lest they know me? Can they, Scout? Jem's question was an appeal. I reassured him. Can't anybody tell what you're going to do lest they live in the house with you, and even I can't tell sometimes. We were walking past our tree, and in its knothole rested a ball of gray twine. "Don't take it, Scout," I said. "This is somebody's hiding place." "I don't think so, Scout." "Yes, it is. Somebody like Walter Cunningham comes down here every recess and hides his things. We come along and take 'em away from him. Listen, let's leave it and wait a couple days. If it ain't gone, then we'll take it, okay?" "Okay, you might be right," said Jem. It must be some little kid's hiding place. He hides things from the bigger folks. You know, it's only when school's in that we've found things." "Yeah," I said, "but we never go by here in the summertime." We went home, and the next morning the twine was where we had left it. When it was still there on the third day, Jem pocketed it. From then on, we considered everything we found in the knothole our property. The second grade was grim, but Jem assured me that the older I got, the better school would be. And then he started off the same way, and it was not until one reached the sixth grade that one learned anything of value. The sixth grade seemed to please him from the beginning. He went through a brief Egyptian period that baffled me. He tried to walk flat like a great deal, and sticking one arm in front of him and one in the back of him, putting one foot behind the other. He declared Egyptians walked that way, and I said if they did, I didn't see how they got anything done. But Jem said that they accomplished more than the Americans ever did. They invented toilet paper and perpetual embalming, and asked where we would be today if they hadn't. Atticus told me to delete the adjectives and I'd have the facts. There was no clearly defined seasons in South Alabama. Summer drifts into autumn, and autumn is sometimes never followed by winter, but turns to days-old spring that melts into summer again. That fall was a long one, hardly cool enough for a light jacket. Jem and I were trotting in our orbit one mild October afternoon when our knothole stopped us again. Something white was inside it this time. Jem let me do the honors, and I pulled out 2 small images carved in soap.
his hair in front of his eyebrows like you do.
Yeah, and the girl wears bangs like you. These are us.
Jam stared at me so long I asked what was the matter, but I got nothing, Scout, for an answer. When we went home, Jam pulled the dolls in his trunk. Less than 2 weeks later, we found a whole package of chewing gum, which we enjoyed. The fact that everything on the Radley place was poison haven't slipped Jim's memory.
Go back to bed.
What you got in the box?
Nothing. Go back to bed.
Come on.
If I show you, will you swear never to tell anybody?
I swear.
Cross your heart. I found all of these in the knothole of that old tree at different times. This is a spelling medal. You know, they used to award these in school to spelling winners before we were born. And another time, I found this. This.
You reckon we ought to write a letter to whoever's leaving us these things? That'd be nice, Jim. We can thank 'em. What's wrong? Jim was holding his ears and shaking his head from side to side. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't know why, Scout. He looked toward the living room. I've got a good mind to tell Atticus. No, I reckon not. I'll tell him for you. No. Don't do that, Scout. Scout? What? He had been on the verge of telling me something all evening. His face would brighten, and he would lean toward me, and then he would change his mind. He changed it again. Nothing. Here, let's write a letter. I pushed a tablet and a pencil under his nose. Okay. Dear Mister. How do you know it's a man? I bet it's Miss Maudie. I've been betting that a long time. Miss Maudie can't chew gum? Jim broke into a grin. You know, she can talk real pretty sometimes. One time I asked her to have a chew, and she said no thanks, that chewing gum cleaved to her palate and rendered her speechless, said Jim carefully. Doesn't that sound nice? Yeah, she can say nice things sometimes. She wouldn't have a watch and a chain anyway. Dear sir, said Jim, we appreciate everything which you have put into the tree for us. Yours very truly, Jeremy Atticus Finch. He won't know who you are if you sign it like that, Jim. Jim erased his name and wrote Jim Finch, and I signed Jean Louise, Scout, beneath it. Jim put the note in an envelope. Next morning on the way to school, he ran ahead of me and stopped at the tree. Jim was facing me when he looked up, and I saw him go stark white. Scout! I ran to him. Someone had filled our knothole with cement. Don't you cry now, Scout. Don't you cry now. Don't you worry, he muttered at me all the way to school. When we went home for dinner, Jim bolted his food, ran to the porch, and stood on the steps. I followed him. Hasn't passed by yet, he said. Next day, Jim repeated his vigil and was rewarded. How to do, Mr. Nathan, he said. Morning, Jim, Scout, said Mr. Radley as he went by. Mr. Radley, said Jim. Mr. Radley turned around. Mr. Radley, did you put cement in that hole in the tree down yonder? Yes, he said. I filled it up. Why'd you do it, sir? The tree's dying. You plug 'em up with cement when they're sick. You ought to know that, Jim. Jim said nothing more about it until that afternoon. When we passed our tree, he gave it a meditative pat on its cement, and he remained deep in thought. He seemed to be working himself into a bad humor, so I kept my distance. As usual, we met Atticus coming home from work that evening. When we were at our steps, Jem said, "Atticus, look down yonder at that tree, please, sir." "What tree, son?" "The one on the corner of the Radley lot, coming from school." "Yes." "Is that tree dying?" "Why, no, son, I don't think so. Look at the leaves. They're all green and full. No brown patches anywhere. It ain't even sick?" "That tree's as healthy as you are, Jem." "Why?" "Mr. Nathan said it was dying." "Well, maybe it is. I'm sure Mr. Radley knows more about his trees than we do." Atticus left us on the porch. Jem leaned on the pillar, rubbing his shoulders against it. "Do you itch, Jem?" I asked politely as I could. He didn't answer. "Come on in, Jem," I said. After a while, he stood there until nightfall, and I waited for him. When we went in the house, I saw he'd been crying. His face was dirty in the right places, but I thought it odd that I had not heard him.